Okay, we're live. Hello,
Hello.
hello everyone. So hello to everyone out there. This is Althea's first ever community call. And I'm Liz, and I work with Althea on all things digital and social media related. And I'm gonna have our co-founders introduce themselves, and we're gonna get right into talking about all things Althea and answering your questions. So feel free to pop your questions into the chat. We have a bunch that people have also sent us, so we will be answering those over the next half an hour or so. So we'll start with you, Deborah.
Hi, I'm Deborah Simpier, and I'm the COO of Althea, and I primarily work with people on the ground organizing in networks, and I also have the network in Klatskanie that I help organize, so I do a lot of field work there as well.
Thanks. And Jehan, you're up next.
I'm Jehan Tremback. I'm the CEO of Althea, and I mostly work on like crypto stuff when I'm programming, and yeah.
Nice. Awesome. And Justin.
Hey, I'm Justin. I'm the CTO of Althea, and I work primarily on router software, protocol design, and various DevOps tasks, aka being a server janitor. So yeah, I'm going to kick it off here by summarizing sort of what is Althea and why does it work? Why does it work and how does it work? So the primary motivation behind the design of Althea comes from a pretty simple question. If you want to go to the store and buy, let's say, a banana, you buy a banana. It has a certain cost, and that's it. Your transaction is over. But if you look around, you'll notice that none of the internet service providers will sell you a megabyte. They all want to sell you something different. They want to sell you a contract with an option to maybe receive a certain number of megabytes. But if you don't use them, they just happen to keep all of your money. And if you were to ask them, they would tell you that it is technically infeasible to try and meter bandwidth this way, or to try and organize internet service not as a single monolithic company owned by one entity, but instead as a cooperative system, like a normal economy where people go around, and obviously the grocery store is buying bananas from somebody. The grocery store doesn't have a monopoly on the existence of bananas. But we accept that that's normal for internet service. And Althea's principle is that it doesn't have to be, and that it would be better if you could buy a megabyte like you can buy anything else. So how exactly do we go about doing that? It's sort of a complicated and big question that I'm going to try and shrink down because I only have a couple of minutes and everybody will be angry if I rant for several hours. So where exactly do I want to start? First of all, I think it's a interesting question to ask, like, why is cryptocurrency? And first and foremost, it's because the financial system as it exists is not very good at letting devices work for you. You know, obviously, if a big company wants to bill you by the minute for using something, that's very easy. If somebody wants to pay you by the minute for doing something, that actually becomes quite hard, and you end up with the company that is providing the service owning all of your money, your devices, and having a lot of control. And we didn't want that. So it's not really possible to do something like Althea without cryptocurrency. I mean, what would you do? Would you hook up your router to direct deposit? The idea is absurd. It provides us with the flexibility to let anyone plug and play the same things that large companies can do, where they will happily sell you anything by the minute, by the cent, by the gigabyte, whatever. But it lets you do it easily as a user just by plugging in a device. So we're going to get into exactly how we move traffic around and that sort of stuff. And this is actually what's really interesting for me, because for most of the, so how should I put it? all of the technology, the internet tools, everything that's in your house that provides internet, most of it hasn't changed in decades. And there's a good reason behind that. I mean, they update the encoding to get a little bit more speed every so often, but the way it works hasn't fundamentally changed for a very long time. That's because it's hard to build systems that move packets around. There are very high requirements on reliability. There are very high requirements on speed. But we have to achieve those goals ourselves. And here I'm sharing a bit of a packet flow diagram for those that are technically interested. I'll be happy to share this later. But the long story short is that we have a normal consumer router that we've reprogrammed. And the reason we do this is because it's an order of magnitude cheaper than building our own hardware, and we can still achieve pretty great performance, even despite everything we need to do. So this router essentially acts as a whole home VPN, as well as a crypto wallet that will automatically buy and sell bandwidth from peers. And while doing all of that, it can achieve a little over 100 megabits per second, and it costs less than $100, well under $100 in bulk. And this is just an enormously better deal than a computer you can buy or a Raspberry Pi or something like that. In order to achieve this sort of speed, the question isn't actually what we built, but what we didn't build, which is a lot of things. Althea is a carefully layered system of existing networking technologies to produce a new outcome. The main innovation we have is a ultra lightweight process. Is an ultra lightweight transaction generation library for. Oh, okay, so that's a bit of a rabbit hole, but it's an ultra lightweight transaction generation library that can run on even these very cheap devices. And the routing protocol, which routes both based on price and the quality of the traffic. I could spend about 15 minutes going over this diagram and how each route represents a different trade-off between price and packet loss and latency, but unfortunately I don't have time in this part of the presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and hand things off to Jehan for a summary of the more on-chain components of Althea and how that works.
Yeah, so we have a token. We don't have it yet. It's called ALTG, and that's Althea Governance Token. It is our blockchain is going to be a Cosmos zone. If you're not familiar with Cosmos, it's kind of like one of these next generation, like sort of next generation sharded blockchains. And that means it has higher capacity than Ethereum or another blockchain where all applications have to share one blockchain. The sharding model in Cosmos is pretty coarse grained. So basically, you make a Cosmos zone, and it is it's a zone for one application. So in our case, that will be an Althea zone that will process payments between routers, basically. So another thing about it, how it works, is that it's proof of stake, delegated proof of stake. So what that means is basically that there's people running validators, and so someone running a validator is like sort of they've got a server and a data center, and it's very secure and stuff like that. And people with tokens delegate the tokens to the validators, and that means they're saying, and this is also similar. You probably heard of this in Tezos. It's actually a very common pattern. So, but basically, they say this person here with the server in the data center, I think that they're secure, and they're going to be validating the blockchain on behalf of me. And if the validator you choose ends up being like having downtime, getting hacked, stuff like that. And then you'll lose like 5% of your tokens. So that's what the token is for. It's like you think of the token as being a a virtual miner. So the way our chain is going to be structured is it's going to be using DAI or some other stable coin. We still have to figure out. We're still gonna have to figure out like how we can switch if DAI loses its peg or something like that. But right now DAI seems like the best bet, and routers will pay each other in DAI, and so the Althea token is just for validation and governance. That I don't know if that covers it. We had I'll give you guys a little bit for people who've been following the project for a while. We had envisioned last year. We had envisioned a little bit more of a more complex governance structure, which is a global TCR. Basically, people would vote on what was allowed to be an official Althea network and stuff like that. Right now, we're putting that on the back burner. We've been really trying to get down to the basics and really focus on traction on the ground. And so for the foreseeable future, that's not going to be something we're focusing on. And the tokens for the foreseeable future are just going to be used for validation.
Jehan, Deborah, really quick before you go, Jehan, we do have a question from the chat about ALGT, and we're going to get to everyone's questions after we finish sort of our intros, but I think this one relates directly to what Jehan was just speaking on. So, and you have a few more minutes. Jehan, what is Nestor as asking, what is the insurance distribution policy for ALGT? Is that something you want to answer?
The distribution. Yeah. So we haven't been, there's obviously like, we don't want to, there's legal things around advertising tokens, stuff like that. We're trying to be very compliant with US law. So I can't really say too much until we have things kind of official, but the rough breakdown of it basically is that 1/3 of the tokens are going to be granted to the community. And that's going to be people who are actually building networks. So one of the first granting programs we're going to be doing is when you get people pre-registered. So if you're starting a network and you get people who have signed up and indicated they're interested, verify their address and stuff, there's going to be token grants associated with that. And then there's a wide variety of other things we could do in the future as well. Perhaps additional grants for people who actually get the networks up and running, that kind of thing. That's 1/3 of the tokens. Another third of the tokens is going to be held by us. We still don't have the exact legal structure figured out, but basically it's going to be held as a fund for development. Not sure if it's going to be a foundation or whatever. And then another third of the tokens we're going to sell to raise money. So we've pre-sold a small number of those already last year, but that's the general breakdown on the distribution. We tried for many years. We thought really hard about whether proof of bandwidth is possible, and we found that probably not. We could get in. There's a whole rabbit hole of that we can get into. But basically, I would say proof of bandwidth you can think of is like trying to having a decentralized network be able to prove that you've delivered some useful bandwidth as a way of minting tokens. That's like trying to have a decentralized network prove that you've mixed someone a good drink. It's very subjective.
So Jehan had mentioned getting people in your neighborhood to sign up. So I'm going to go a little bit over what that looks like. So if you're excited about getting Althea to your neighborhood and you want to see how that could happen, we started a new what we call an Altheahood program, which was modeled after what a lot of like fiber ISPs do to ensure the viability of the area. So an Althea organizer can make money by, let me open this up here, by a monthly subnet fee on the router that isn't part of the bandwidth payments. And so this could let you also partner with someone who might be running what we call the gateway node. So that person has some backhaul fiber, which is like a wholesale fiber into the neighborhood somewhere, and is making money via bandwidth payments. So what that organizer can do is either pair with them or decide that they want to run that gateway as well, and get both the bandwidth and the subnet organization fee. But part of making sure that that's a viable thing is ensuring that you have enough subscribers in that area. And that's exactly what the Althea Hoods program is all about. So this is an example of one we have here for Klatskanie. Now, if this was, let's actually do the one here for Newburgh. So you can see we have a threshold that we're looking to reach before we're building out. So this is an area that we have already picked out as one that we can get a reasonable fiber backhaul to, and one that we've also taken a look at where we could locate a gateway and what the line of sight is, which is actually Google Earth has a lot of great tools. So you can see here, this is one of Klatskanie, where we can put a pin in the map somewhere and look at what they call the view shed. So that's going to give us an idea of what we can see line of sight and easily set up antennas to reach. So we've already done that for Newburgh and sort of picked an area that makes sense to build out to. And then we also know that once we reach 100 pre-registrations, that this will look like a viable network right off the bat. So these are a couple of organizers there in Newburgh that are starting that off. They also will be running the gateway location as well, so making bandwidth and subnet payments. And then Althea also will be working together with our organizers for marketing materials and giving suggestions on how to do social media and on-ground networking as well. Different kind of networking, marketing networking. And then the other piece of this is that once you get someone signed up, they're going to get a postcard in the mail. They're going to fill that out and send that back in so that you know that you have a very committed subscriber. So if that looks like something that will work for in your neighborhood, shoot us an email, give us a call, or connect with us on Discord. Trying to figure out how to end screen share. There we go. On the Discord chat, and we'll put some links maybe in the YouTube chat as well, so that you can connect with us and we can help you get started with that.
Awesome.
Liz, you were unmuted and you accidentally remuted yourself.
Oh, thank you. I'm Liz, your moderator, who, thanks, Justin. And I help Althea with all things digital and social media. And I'm just going to go, everyone in the chat. We've got Nestor, we have Decentralized Hyphalab, Josh Tillett, and all the good people over in Boulder. So hi to them, and Kenrick. We have Kenrick, and a bunch of other people I think are out there watching. We asked for questions before this call, and we've also gotten some in the chat. So feel free to pop your questions in. I'm going to start with one from that we've received in our call out for this call, and this is a question for Deborah. What are the hurdles to adoption specifically among underrepresented populations? And so we just talked about Althea Hoods, and what are those challenges in getting people signed up and using Althea?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the major challenge is getting the word out about it, right? Which is why it's so important that we have these local organizers on the ground. Who might even be physically knocking on doors or putting door hangers up or reaching people through word of mouth. Sometimes in rural or very low income areas, they may not be, aware of what's coming, or what's around them. So I think, just reaching those people, getting the word out that they can actually get, broadband internet. We actually just set up a customer within the Althea or the Klatskanie network that had no internet at all. prior to us setting them up. So had only heard about Althea actually through the relay nearby. So that's I think what's really compelling about having this viral marketing that happens from the relays and the very hyper local nature of it. I think the other big problem is in some of the underserved areas, you have unbanked populations. So we typically have been using Coinbase and integrating with a debit card, which isn't possible if you're unbanked. To pay the router balance. So, for example, in Colombia, how they're looking to solve that problem is having like the local tiendas, the little grocery stores nearby, have access to the XDAI in this case to pay the router balance. But that can be a hurdle as well too. How do we get them the currency they need to pay?
Got it. So, and those are definitely, I think, challenges. Another question we had asked that we got when we put the call out is about Althea and foam synergies and joint development. And this is, I think, for Jehan to answer.
Yeah. So I think there are some synergies. I also covered. I was actually on foam's community call last month or something. I covered that there too. But basically, foam and Althea both use radio transmitters, and so there's some synergies that are involved with that. And what I will say is that like any location that you have an Althea node, so you have an Althea transmitter somewhere, that's like basically guaranteed to be a good location for a foam node. It's not really the other way around. So if you have a foam node in a certain location, that's not guaranteed to be a good place for an Althea node. The reason for that is that foam uses very low frequencies, the 900 megahertz range. And those go through a lot of different, they can go through buildings and trees and anything. But they don't carry a lot of data. Althea uses higher frequencies, 5 gigahertz, 60 gigahertz stuff. And so you need a good line of sight. You got to be able to line an antenna used by an Althea node up with another antenna and get them to get a line of sight over to another. It could be very far away, but it's got to have a line of sight. So but I mean, you've got a radio transmitter on the roof. That's a great place for a foam node. And for people who don't know what foam is, which I don't know how many people there are that don't know what foam is, but it's basically a system where they're creating these little devices that use low frequency radio waves to essentially continuously triangulate their positions and form sort of a decentralized GPS-like system. So yeah, that's where I see the synergies. Maybe in the future we could have a thing where Althea antennas, come with a built-in foam node, and that's just like another little source of revenue for the person with the antenna.
Nice, awesome. And that I'm gonna, Justin, before I go to, I have a question for you, but before I go to that, we had a question early in the chat, and I think this might be a good time to answer it. That said, could you comment on the main strengths and differences between Althea and other players in the decentralized mesh networks, such as GoTenna and those? So I think we've been talking about the hurdles of adoption and synergies with foam and that. So can you guys, I don't know who wants to take that one on. I'll let you guys decide. Maybe Deborah or Justin.
I think I'll take this one. So so let's see. Let's start by trying to name, other people that are sort of in this space. There is GoTenna, which is a hardware manufacturer that sells little, I guess they're doggles that attach to your phone via Bluetooth that let you text message over long distances off the grid. There's also Right Mesh, which wants to provide phone mesh, so they want to have phones talk to each other and create a long distance signal. And I'm going to sort of focus in on those two as they're two examples that are more on the up and up. So the thing with GoTenna is that they have a small battery powered device that achieves long distances. And fundamentally, to do this, they have to use a lower frequency because the speed of the data transmission is proportional to the frequency, which is part of why Wi-Fi doesn't go as far as, let's say, your FM radio station. So Gotenna uses LoRa, which is a lower frequency that penetrates walls well, but has a very low data rate. You can't even get dial-up over a Gotenna. That's why they use it for text messages. Text messages are quite small, so it works quite well. Right Mesh is using higher frequencies. They're using 2.4 and 5 gigahertz built into the phones. The phones own Wi-Fi devices and maybe some specialized hardware. So they can achieve higher speeds, but they still have problems with battery constraints and the issue that wireless can be unreliable when you spray signals in all directions. So there's a signal sphere, it's easy to block, you need a lot of power, lots of things like that. Althea is focusing in on home internet because we believe that it is the sweet spot between physics, cost, and performance. We use, like physically installed aimed antennas because they're both very cheap, well under $100 to achieve half a gigabit. And they're easy to install. They're low enough power that there are very few rules about installing them. No permit required in the United States. And this is a sweet spot for providing good quality, fast service while still not violating the rules of physics, because physics doesn't take kindly to that. It's also a factor of you can provide services over distances. Obviously, cellular networks exist, but it's very hard to make the economics of that work out. Because let's say you wanted to have a network sold entirely over Wi-Fi using no installed directional antennas. Great, you're not screwing anything to houses. You need less installer expertise. That's good. But how many Wi-Fi hotspots would you need in a dense city like New York alone to make it even worth spending 10 minutes to sign up? The answer is an enormous number. Whereas providing internet to someone's home, it immediately makes sense for them to use it. It immediately makes sense for them to pay for it. And it immediately makes sense for them to install it.
Great. So another question that we got ahead of time, and I think this is also for Justin, what would it take to implement payments over Bitcoin's Lightning Network?
Yeah, so I think this brings up something I want to highlight, which is that Althea is that there is Althea, like a product that we are working together to create and get people to use. And there's also Althea as an open source project. And Althea as an open source project is definitely not married to a Cosmos zone or anything. If somebody is willing to contribute code that works well, that's interoperable, we'll accept it. And this includes support for things like Bitcoin payments. Now, getting into the actual nitty-gritty of how we would do this, the biggest barrier, like I mentioned earlier, is that we had to design our own ultra lightweight ETH client just to generate transactions. Now, we didn't expect it to be that hard. In fact, we spent a year thinking like, there are so many Ethereum clients, we can definitely get one to work. And the answer is no. They're all very dependent on hardware. They're all very dependent on having a lot more RAM than we have. This is an Edge Router X. It's a MIPS device with a MIPS processor in it. The only way you can get one of these to generate Ethereum transactions on Earth is using our library, because we had to custom build one that would work on very small resource-constrained devices.
But I mean,
so we need a similar client for Bitcoin in order for it to interoperate with the Lightning Network, and that would actually be most of the difficulty making that.
I don't know. I disagree on that, but I mean, Justin knows more about this than I do, so I'm probably wrong. But I feel like there's a lot of Bitcoin C++ stuff out there that might work. To me, the main reason we're not using Bitcoin is the volatility, and then also the high transaction fees as well. But I will say Lightning is certainly the best Lightning, multi-hop payment channel thing out there. Getting people to buy into the whole Bitcoin thing, it's like you got to believe that it's going to be, the future of money or whatever. Like, it's way easier just to say, hey, these are dollars. So that's, that's why we're about stablecoins.
Well, yes. So there's also the stablecoin argument. We want to use a stablecoin, but that's answering the question of why didn't we choose Bitcoin as the default currency? That's not answering the question of why didn't like what would it take to add support, which is how I interpreted it. But for context, Jehan and I co-design everything, and we always see things differently. And this is actually very helpful because typically when there's an easier way to do something that I'm not seeing, Jehan will see it, and vice versa.
Awesome. And there's a follow-up question to this from the Boulder, and it says, Josh is asking, could I use one wallet on multiple devices to pay for access on all of them?
Yes, I'm not sure I would. So I explicitly thought of that case when I was writing the code and tried to make sure that it would work. I'm not going to guarantee that it will work because nobody has tried it yet, but it should. I mean, feel free to try and let me know if it breaks because that's something I should fix.
Okay. Well, oh, yes, Deborah.
It's a good thing, though, if the nodes of the network are owned in a decentralized fashion and that you don't own, maybe you might own a gateway and one relay, but, it's a decentralized network where people run their own nodes.
Nice. Awesome. So actually that leads to another question we did get from our from the community, and this is for Deborah. What does it take to set up the network with no knowledge of routers networking? Can customers contact people in their neighborhoods? How do they find out about this? So what level of skill do you need to have to do all of this?
Yeah, I think that really the important key is just the willingness to learn. Everything that Althea does makes all the networking within the network easy. So it's just aiming antennas and bridging them together and then plugging in the appropriate, and then plugging in an Althea router. So all of the MPLS over OSPF and all of these different routing protocols, it's all handled from the Althea software itself, as well as the billing. However, there is some skill in setting up bridged antennas and aiming them. But I think that if you have the willingness to learn, we have resources available. We're also really willing to help you and, consult with you along the way as well. So I think the biggest skill that is necessary is just the ability to sort of manage the project as an organizer and talk to people and be willing to interface with end users and relays and other people owning equipment within the network and get everybody working together.
Awesome. So just a few more questions before we wrap up. I really want to get to everything. So we will try to run through these last 2 or 3 questions. This is for Jehan. What is the roadmap for Althea's Eragon, and am I pronouncing Eragon right? Eragon app, now that Eragon also has the role of in DAO's networks? I think I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah, I don't completely, let's see. Also the role of DAOs and networks. Yeah, so I'll go over the role of DAOs and networks first. So the subnet DAO is meant to be run by the subnet organization or the subnet organizer. And that's, for instance, in Newburgh there, what Deborah was showing you, that's Dante and Perry. And so those guys are the subnet organizers or the subnet organization. And the subnet DAO is an interface that they have on the blockchain, which collects money. So it collects a fixed monthly fee from each router, and that's in addition to the bandwidth fees they're paying. So it's kind of split half and half, and that's to fund the organizers to support and expand the network. Anyway, the subnet DAO is the interface through which that fee is collected, and the other role it has is that they approve nodes that come onto the network. So, for instance, you don't want to have a Sybil attack. You don't want to have somebody making a million fake nodes. That is a way that somebody could attack the network if they wanted to. The subnet organizers, though, got to approve nodes to come on, and so it's not possible. Also, if there are nodes that are doing other things like griefing, there's a certain amount of stuff. The protocol is pretty secure, but there's there's some nuisance kind of DOS stuff you can do. The subnet organizers can also kick those nodes off. So that's what the subnet DAO does, is the interface to do that. And we had been, we've done a lot of work actually on developing an app on Eragon to do that. And what we really like about Eragon is just the vision they have for kind of creating an operating system for organizations. So having the voting components, possibly in the future having different plugins that are maybe different forms of voting, different organizational techniques that people want to use, could just be downloaded as a plugin. It's very, very cool. And then our app on there would just be like, hey, here's a list of nodes, here's the payments you're getting and all that stuff. So right now, though, we kind of have that on hold. We are going to be using probably like a pretty simple Gnosis multisig in the short term. And there's a few reasons for that. So number one, we found that Eragon is still somewhat immature. There's some very important features that are missing. The main one would be usernames. And they're very receptive to feature requests and stuff like that. So they're working on getting it in, but it's still not, we don't feel like it's properly understandable for kind of a non-technical end user. And the other reason is actually on the Cosmos side. So right now we're testing on Ethereum and also on XDAI, but we are going to be moving to Cosmos pretty soon. And Ethereum contracts don't run on there yet. So that's another reason. So for the time being, we're going with a simpler Gnosis multisig. We hope to pick it back up again with Eragon once things develop a little bit further.
Okay, awesome. There's another question we had earlier in the chat at the very beginning of our call, and it asks about any impact on DAOs, on the DAOs were to function with the removal of the global TCR.
Yeah, so that's a very good question, actually. So the global TCR, what that was doing was basically is voting system. We vote with all these people voting on chain, and then basically if they see that like a given subnet is doing a bad job, a lot of user complaints about them, those user complaints have to come like out of band of the governance system, but there's a lot of complaints or whatever, then they could basically vote that DAO off. And that would mean that routers with the standard Althea firmware would not be able to join that network anymore. So we've moved away from that design for the time being, for like I think I covered in the beginning, for a few reasons. And among them is like, TCRs don't seem to be working as well as people thought they would, number one. And number two, also, it's like we've really found that like we don't need, at this stage in the game, we don't need to be policing subnets. We've got to just be getting people to start subnets in the first place. So the subnet, so as it is now without the TCR, somebody running a subnet is going to be able to use the subnet DAO and everything as a tool. And there's not going to be really any control over it in that respect. In terms of policing the networks, we don't think a lot of that's going to be necessary in the short term. But if there is somebody who is, doing something really egregious where we are like, this is not acceptable, then we're gonna say you can't use the Althea name anymore for this. Obviously, then the software is open source, so they could continue to use the system. But that's kind of how we're dealing with governance for the short term, which is essentially centralized. But really, it's just governance at this point. It's just governance over the brand. So yeah.
Awesome. So we have two last questions, and that we're gonna take. And I tried to get to everyone's. I think there's a few we didn't get to. One, and I think this is more for Justin to answer, and then another one I think that Deborah can take, and you guys can decide which order. The first one is, how do you see Althea competing in regions that already have a strong big corp ISP presence? Is this just viable in areas that are currently underserved? And then another question we had from the chat was about the Althea organization. How many people are involved on the development side? And do we have a lot of, how big are our open source contributors from the community? So those, I think, are the two questions we'll end on. And I think if Justin and Deborah, you guys both want to decide how to take a stab at those, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'd like to just maybe start, and then I think Justin has a really good explanation for how Althea can work in monopolistic urban areas where you have a monopolistic ISP or maybe just two choices. But I was going to say that many of our urban areas actually are underserved. If you get outside of the main metropolitan area, your choices are usually very limited. And this also can be a place where the fiber backhaul is very accessible. So you have, both of that kind of perfect combination of easily accessible fiber and also a more densely populated area. And thirdly, an area that is underserved in the amount of choices that they have. They're unhappy with their current providers, but there aren't any other choices. But I think Justin has kind of a good explanation about how that kind of technically works.
Yeah, so the big goal of Althea is, or sort of the thing I was alluding to at the start when I did my introduction, is that we want to create a bandwidth market. And starting one is sort of difficult because you need enough people using Althea devices to buy in a bandwidth market to make it really a market. And that means that starting in deeply underserved areas is sort of a no-brainer. Like Deborah said, many of the people that were installing in our test network previously had either very slow DSL or not so good cable service or no internet at all. And this, of course, makes our lives a lot easier because it's very easy to do better than that just by virtue of caring at all. Currently in denser urban areas where service is usually acceptable, if still not great, Althea can definitely work. You just need the starting scale has to be a little higher, and the install base is a little bit more difficult to get started with. But in many cities, you actually do have a combination of underserved and dense and urban. For example, in Buffalo, New York, most of the suburbs are all on DSL. They get 15 to 30 megabits. We could triple that for less than $200 a house per install. So there it would make a lot of sense and would be very easy. For example, in the apartment building I'm sitting in right now, I'm one of the 4% of Americans with fiber to the door, fiber to the apartment. But that only happened because Google Fiber is like 2 miles farther west, and AT&T wanted to surround them in their own fiber. If I go 2 miles in the other direction, everybody is dealing with between 25 and 100 megabit per second cable connections, which we could fairly easily compete with. So this divide is sort of is actually a big opportunity for us because here in downtown Raleigh, because of Google Fiber and AT&T, there's a lot of easily accessible internet backbone fiber. And I only have to transport it, throw a signal a short distance in order to serve the people that these providers are ignoring while they sit around and duke it out with each other.
Awesome. So, yeah, and I think that about covers it. Did you want to talk briefly about the question about our Althea organization? How big is the team? And do we use the open source? And then I think that's pretty much it for today. There are questions we didn't get to, and we'll see about trying to get you answers to those and tweet them all out to that stuff. But yeah, would you guys like to just talk about the Althea organization and then sign off?
Yeah. So yeah, we are a C corp, like a startup, and so it's me, Deborah, Justin, and we also have we have people like Liz, for instance. She's part-time, helps us with marketing. Some design consultants, and then also 2 developers, Adam and Sebastian. So it's a pretty small team. But yeah, I mean, does that answer the question?
Yes, definitely. And
There was also the question about open source
yeah.
contributors. So we are based entirely off of open source technology. Like I was saying earlier, we contribute to several upstream projects like Babel, and then we have a small number of contributors to our specific technologies. Like I said, a big part of my design goal is to avoid building anything ourselves. Didn't quite achieve that. It would have been nice, but we got very close as far as the networking technology, and we were able to build something out of existing projects, which we contribute to. And then there are a number of contributors that have added features to our own stuff. If you take a look at the Althea_RS GitHub, and hit the contributors list, that would be the main repository if you're curious.
awesome. Okay, and I will give you guys one last under 15 seconds to last thoughts, words, and then we'll sign off. We will be, just to let everyone know, we will be doing these more often. Someone asked in the chat that we should take the time to do these on a monthly basis. So we hope to be able to. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming and hanging out with us. So yeah, give me your last, if you want to say a last word.
Thank you. And the email is hello@altheamesh.com. If anyone would like to contact us, reach out, become an organizer.
Jehan?
No, that's a great message from Deborah.
All right. Yes.
Thanks for being on the call,
Yep.
everyone.
Justin?
If you enjoy reading stories about hilarious Rube Goldberg networking errors, you should read my next development update. You'll like it.
Awesome. Awesome. Again, thank you. And we will see you again, hopefully in another month or so. Bye.
Bye-bye.